Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Buff Nagel the podcast, where we explore entertaining and enlightening discussions of the adventure of life and all things good. From science and technology to history and philosophy to leadership and success. We hope to give you a better understanding of the world and skills for everyone to pursue their own adventure.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Buff Nagel the podcast, where we talk about all things good and the pursuit of the adventure of life. I'm Rafe. Zach is on leave today. I'm doing it without him, so I'd love to promise that we're going to have a great show, but I think, you know what? I'll bet my mom will say it's a great show. Let's see what happens, all right? Hey, we can be reached at Buffnagel at buffnagel.com. We're on Twitter and Apple Podcast. We're on Spotify, Amazon. We are everywhere. Yeah, last week, we are so everywhere. Last week, I was driving and this train went by, like hundreds of cars, these big box cars, and there's graffiti written on the side. And some of the graffiti said, I swear to you, some of the graffiti said, "Listen to the Buff," in those big fancy graffiti letters. It's amazing. We are everywhere out there. All right. So, it really helps us if you guys subscribe to the podcast on that podcast machine that you're listening to on your phone or wherever it is. You subscribe, that really helps us out because it lets people know that you guys are out there. And it really, really helps us out if you guys give us one of those 5-star reviews and let us know I guess in what way we have moved you. Okay, that'd be a great thing. So every time we get a 5-star review, keep this in mind. I get pudding and Zach gets brownies. So, we are here. I'm recording this right after Easter in April of 2022. And, I have some thoughts about Easter, and I've been thinking these thoughts, and I figured I would say them out loud, and we'll see what happens. And in particular, I have some thoughts on the Triduum, the 3 days of Easter, the Good Friday, Holy Saturday, and Easter Sunday triplet, that combination. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit. I'm going to get around there kind of in a roundabout way, as I'm known to do at times. Now, I've mentioned a couple times that 1977, the summer, I think it was probably summer of 1977, I was 12 years old. And the movie Star Wars came out. And I've talked about this before on the show, how this movie was a game changer in how at least I saw movies. And I was a perfect age for it. I was 12 years old. I remember my older brother he might have been 13 or 14 at the time. He went and saw it before I did. And he said, I just remember him talking nonstop about this film before, the next morning when he came home he came home that night. We talked the next morning. He told us all these magical, wonderful things about this movie, from the great special effects to the story it was telling, to all the excitement and the odd characters and the music. I remember we had the Star Wars soundtrack. It was the first soundtrack I can remember that we had. We got it like for Christmas that year. It came out on cassette tape. We had that. John Williams was a household name at that point because of things like the Star Wars soundtrack. It's just incredible music, incredible story, these special effects. And, this story, when I'm 12 years old and I'm sitting in the theater watching this thing go by, I had no idea what to expect. Okay. Everything was new to me then. I'd never seen this story before or heard of the story, or who knows what a Jedi was. Everything was bizarre, and I had no idea what would happen. I had no idea how these things would turn out. Okay. And that's the first lesson, is I had no idea how it would go. All right. Now let's roll backwards. 1922, October 1922, T.S. Eliot publishes The Wasteland. All right. It's a 434-line epic poem. Discussed all sorts of things. The line, "April is the cruelest month," comes from The Wasteland. And you know what? We're in April now, and April can be cruel for a number of reasons, but that comes from T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. And The Wasteland is considered a representation of the disillusionment the post-war generation. Now, the post-war generation at that point was the post-Great War. The World War I was called at that time the Great War, and it was the war to end all wars. Remember, it was going to do that, and there was going to be everything was going to be great after that. There was world peace and all those things, and young men had gone to war and seen that it was not the wonderful and beautiful thing that they had heard about, and there was a lot of disillusionment. It's like, what are we doing here? What is going to happen was the question, right? Elliot was at the time he was suffering. Both he and his wife were suffering from mental disorders. His marriage was on the rocks. Things were falling apart. He was a man in despair, and at that time he's writing The Wasteland. All right, World War I, this great war, had ended in 1918. It ended 4 years prior, November 11th. Remember the armistice. World War I, the Great War, was a conflict that all but brought all the glory and grandeur of Western European Christendom and the Belle Epoque, brought that to a close, almost shut it down completely. It was essentially at an end. The Belle Epoque is this term for the end of what we might call the in British times you call it the Victorian era. This time we talked about it on the podcast, the Midnight in Paris episode, where Gil's character meets Adriana, and while Gil longs to go back to the 1920s, Adriana longs for the late 1800s, where they had this golden age, horses and carriage and gas lamps and grand fashion of the age. The 1920s Paris that Gil enjoys is the Paris of Picasso and Cole Porter and Hemingway. And Gil loves that because he loves to look back to that era. But people in that era looked back to Belle Epoque, which was the end of the Victorian age in Britain, the grandeur of the end of the I guess I think of it as the winning streak of the West. All right, the West had gone on this incredible tear from the late 1300s, maybe 1400s to 1900, and they had done everything. And we've talked about that here in the podcast a number of times, all the different wonders that we have seen. We talked about the Ninja Turtles and the artists, the Renaissance artists, and what they had achieved. We talked about Magellan sailing around the world. At least Magellan's ship sailing around the world, and the first person to go through the strait on purpose, and cutting off the southern tip of South America and then across the Pacific. We talked about Joan of Arc and Marco Polo. We talked about Gil and Midnight in Paris and all sorts of things. And when we talk a lot about the grandeur of the West, we're talking about that time from, say, 1400 to 1900, where everything was wonderful. But the Great War changed all that. World War I shattered that. You could say it shattered the myth, it shattered the illusion, but it really shattered whatever it was. It came tumbling down. And T.S. Eliot and his generation, they were sitting in the early 1920s thinking, well, now what? What is going to happen? What do we do? Where do we go? What is going to happen? And it's interesting to me whenever I hear people talk about that time frame. We learn in school, when we learn the history, we learn American history. We do Revolutionary War, War of 1812, a lot of war stuff going on. We might do Northwest Ordinance, and then we do, we get to the Civil War, and we get to Reconstruction, and then World War I, World War II, Cold War. We do. And now we're here, right? That's how it goes. And we think of this time in the 1920s and 1930s as between the wars. But to people like Eliot, this wasn't between the wars to them. It was after the Great War. There was no knowledge in 1922 of Hitler rolling into Poland in 1939. There's this perspective that changes with time that we get to see, but people living in the time couldn't. So the time between the war has to be viewed in the context of the people who were living it. right? They lived it. They saw the glory of the civilization before, and they saw Western Europe slaughter itself with very little benefit, if any. And what it ended up doing was that, they didn't know it at the time, but it ended up with producing the rise of Germany in 1939 and the disaster that was World War II, right? Which brings us to World War II. On the coast of Normandy, where the Allies started the reclaiming of Europe from the Nazis, there's a point of land called Point du Hoc. I think that's right in French. It's Point du Hoc, but there's no H in French, and then point is not point, it's point. Right? So at Normandy, there's these 35-meter tall cliffs, 110 feet tall. And at the top of the cliffs were artillery, right? German artillery staged at the top of the cliffs to make anybody trying to advance onto the continent from across the channel, make it very difficult. But the Army Rangers were charged with taking the cliffs. And on June 6, 1944, these men scaled the cliffs with ropes and took out the artillery and successfully did their job with regard to the D-Day invasion of Normandy. And we know now that the Allies then, within a year, foot by foot, step by step, mile by mile, rolled their way to Berlin. And they were in Berlin and met the Russians, the Soviets, in Berlin in the summer of 1945. But scaling the walls, climbing the ropes, watching their comrades fall, these men did not know that they would take Berlin. They didn't know if they would be turned back, if D-Day would be the wonderful, grand reclamation of the European continent, or whether it would be a failure to take down a tyrannical regime. They didn't know. They went forward and they did not know what we know now. They had to ask themselves, what are we doing? What's next? What is going to happen? They did not know. We know now, all right? Hindsight changes the game, all right? Experience is the story. Experience changes the story. Everything you know now changes your perspective of what you saw in the past. When I was 12, I had no idea that the Star Wars story was just a retelling of the classic Western myth, the Arthurian legend, written in a space fantasy, all right? The royal boy who doesn't know he's royalty, the sorcerer who gives him a magic sword, right? The crazy sidekick who helps steal his virtue, right? And he fights to find himself, to find his destiny, to find himself in his destiny, in power. But then he rejects that power, and we find out that only those who are unwilling to accept power should be the ones who have it. The story of King Arthur is the story of Luke Skywalker, and it's the Christ story, right? It is the story of royalty that is not noticed, that is given great power, and decides to give it up. Today, we see 1922 as between the wars, but they didn't see it that way. We know now that Germany rose amid the destruction of the Great War to fight again, and this time being led by a maniacal psychopath. The Rangers who climbed Point du Hoc, they managed to march into hell and save the world. But they didn't know that time that they were going to do that. Time changes things. It changes your perspective of what happened before. Your perspective comes with experience. So today we're facing all sorts of struggles, all sorts of unknowns, all sorts of concerns, and we don't know what's coming tomorrow. Who's going to win the day? What will happen? How will it turn out? What do we do? Politicians, global events, personal events, diseases, relationships, worries, wonders. We live in the now. We can't know what the future will hold. This recent Easter, Lent and Easter, the Triduum, the 3 days, Good Friday, Holy Saturday, Easter Sunday, they shared with me in this context one more such story. 11 men and a few women companions. They've just lost their leader in the most mind-boggling fashion. A week prior, he had been heralded as king. He entered the city to throngs, thousands of screaming fans. And yet 4 days later, he was on trial. He was being tried by the empire. Truth incarnate itself was on trial. He was found innocent. Pilate found him innocent, but the crowd rioting called for his execution. The execution of God himself, of truth, was called for, and a murderer was asked to be released. The governor, the coward that we know, caved to the crowd and then washed his hands, hoping to be shed of his guilt. The king was executed, placed in a tomb on Friday, and his followers, about a dozen of them, hid in fear on Saturday. What were they thinking? All right, you got to imagine, like, well, what were they thinking? Everything we fought for, everything we planned for, everything we hoped for, it's gone. This wasn't supposed to happen. A week ago, what were we doing? Here it is Saturday. They are stuck thinking, now what? What do we do? What is going to happen? There's utter despair, loss, emptiness. There's a dark tomb, a dark, cold tomb is all they have left of their leader. Are we like that now? Is that how we feel? And then comes the story. Okay, this is like my favorite line in Scripture. Is this story that starts out the resurrection story, and the way I always hear it in my head, and I can't find the translation that says it this way. So this is Rafe's translation. Early in the morning, on the first day of the week, when it was still dark, the women went to the tomb. And whenever I hear that in conversation, someone says, well, early in the morning. And I think early in the morning on the first day of the week when it was still dark. Okay. It's springtime there in Jerusalem now, right? Springtime here. It's Passover. Still dark in the morning it's like 5 a.m. Right. The women got up really early to go to the tomb. Right. This isn't like a 9 o'clock thing. This isn't strolling into some sort of happy Easter fest. This is dark. This is still cold. Right? They got up, grabbed a candle, right, or a lamp, and they made their way to the tomb early in the morning on the first day of the week. Once Passover was over, once the Sabbath was done, on they go. Right? They went to the tomb. There's no stone. The tomb is empty. And it's the women that are there first. Where are the men? They're sleeping in. I guess they're figuring, what are we going to do? They don't know. The women act. They go to the tomb. They see it empty. They go back. And they tell the story. There's confusion. There's talk of angels. There's talk of gardeners. Read the four different gospels and listen to the differences. Listen to the similarities and find out how they're all similar. And like, if you've ever been in a situation where a lot of people have experienced the same event, but it's been charged with energy and emotion, listen to the differences that come out, even of exactly the same story. You know, I think it would bother me more if all four of the gospels said exactly the same thing. This is how real people act. Right? There's angels. There's gardeners. Mary Magdalene says she sees him. Who saw what? All right? These are conflicting stories in the Gospels, but there's one common theme, and the theme is that there's no body. It's just an empty tomb now. The bed is made. The cloths are lined up. They're folded. The room is neat. There's nothing there. They go home. Now what do we do? Think of all the 24 hours, like the 72 hours before Saturday, how things have flip-flopped. And now it changes dramatically differently in the other direction. They're sitting there at home behind locked doors. And the gospel tells us, like what Father Heff said this a couple weeks ago when he was on. He said they locked for fear of the Jews. They were Jews, all right? Heff said he thinks that they may have been scared of Jesus. They thought, holy cow, if he does come back, he's going to be mad. He's going to be mad we betrayed him. We let him go. There were 11 of us. The soldiers came. We ran. Everybody betrayed him. Everybody left him. The only one left at the cross was John and Mary. That's it. 2 left. That's all we got. Right? I think he may be mad. But what does he do? Okay. They are in the room. The door is locked. He shows up. What does he say? I mean, what would you say? Dude, check out my hands. Dude, check out my sides. No, it's peace be with you. Peace. Peace. Think of the turmoil you face, the political turmoil, the personal turmoil, right? Maybe you're sick. Maybe you have a sick friend. Maybe your country's in trouble. Maybe you're worried about how your kids are going to turn out. But who knows? What do you need? You need peace. You need peace. Peace be with you, he says to them, and he shows them his hand and his side. Thomas isn't there. A week later, Thomas is there. We find out he's doubting, and he is proven to have seen Jesus. There he was. He touches him. He sees him. But miles away, on the way to Emmaus, we all said Emmaus, right? 2 of the disciples are walking, and they're sad. You read the gospel account, it's almost comical. They're like, yeah, their heads are down. Things are really bad, right? And Jesus walks with them. He walks with them, and he says, hey, what's going on? What are you talking about? And they say, what are you the only guy who doesn't know what the hell's going on? This is incredible. And he tells them the story, and he was like, don't you see? Don't you see how this changes everything? Your story in the past needs to be rethought. Think of what was in the past, all you didn't know when you sat there on Saturday and you were worried and you didn't know why the things that had happened to him. Go back and reread the stories now. Think about it now. He is alive. And they recognize him. That is him. He's there with the breaking of the bread, right? Everything is about perspective and experience. They see it now. And now that they see it, what was darkness to them takes on a whole new meaning. He is resurrected. Life has beaten death and truth has won. And the world is now, and this is the thing that's interesting, the world is now completely different. They say that the resurrection is the point on which all of history turns. Right? Everything about that changes everything. The band of 11 and the followers, they grow. Love is the goal. The conviction of countless martyrs brings in enough new converts to transform Rome and then the world. The world we live in now is Christian at its core. Our understanding of good and evil has a source. Truth has a source. Courage, wisdom, virtue, honor come to us through 2,000 years of Christ among us and that understanding. A rational God can be studied and reasoned about. His world reflects his majesty, his wisdom, and his love, his agape. But still, some of us have doubt. We fear, we wonder, we worry. Satan keeps poking us. But we have something that the 11 in the upper room on Saturday did not have. We have hope. Not a hope in a magic world of fairy tales. Not a world without suffering. Not a world without sorrow. Those are all still there. But what we have now is a joy that is present despite these traumas, despite the pain, and despite the suffering. We know the perspective now is different. Whatever your fears, whatever your concerns, whatever your doubts or worries, there is hope. Julian of Norwich was visited by Christ in a vision, who told her, all shall be well. All shall be well. All manner of thing shall be well. This world of ours is not just the material world of our senses. There is truth, and there is justice, and there is love to be found, whether or not there is matter in the universe to express it. Mary says in the Magnificat to Elizabeth at the visitation after the Annunciation, she says, my soul proclaims the greatness of the Lord. My soul, my life force, my being, my very self, myself proclaims the greatness of the Lord. All of the universe shows that glory. On Easter Sunday, I got the tremendous joy of taking my granddaughter, who's a little over a year old, to Mass on Easter morning. And if you know me, this does not come as a surprise, but tears of joy flowed from my eyes as I was able to show her the grand choruses, the instrumentals, how the percussionists work, right? How the singers sing, how the bell players bang the bells and the trumpeters trumpet, right? We got to hear brass and timpani and organs accompany human voices raising songs of praise and glory to God, a God of hope. All shall be well. Perspective changes everything. Seek truth, seek beauty, and seek goodness. They are the signposts of the road to God. Be hopeful and enjoy the adventure of life.